On today's episode, we're joined by McMaster defensive coordinator and assistant head coach Scott Brady. Scott, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time. Kind of the first question we ask guys is, how did you get into coaching and what kind of brought you to McMaster? So just kind of give us that little introduction and let coaches know how you got into the game.
Yeah, so I played 4 years of university ball at Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick. The whole time I was playing, I kind of always knew that I ultimately wanted to get involved in coaching. And then in 2010, as soon as I finished up my playing career, I started coaching. I coached special teams and defensive backs that first year. And then in 2011, I was fortunate enough to get promoted defensive coordinator out there at Mount A. Held that position until 2016 when I became the head coach at Mount A, and I did that for 2 years. And then after the 2017 season, Greg Knox, who was the head coach at McMaster at the time, gave me a call and offered me the defensive coordinator position at Mac, and have been doing that since then.
You guys have had a ton of success, obviously, culminating in the most recent Yates Cup, championship there with Coach Steph coming back. You guys had a great season. I think a lot when people think of kind of the old, the McMaster teams that were winning in the previous Coach Patasic era, I think a lot of people think of Kyle Quinlan and offense and you guys throwing the ball, all over the place and having a ton of guys that went on to the CFL on that side of the ball. I think this year's iteration, there's so much influence from that defense and your guys' ability to, give you guys a chance to win every week. What's kind of your, priorities as a defensive coordinator and I guess your philosophies in general as to how you try and defend offensive football?
Yeah, I think as much as there's been, some exceptional offensive players, McMaster like Kyle, guys like Danny, Declan, there's been a long run of offensive success. I think really a huge part of the reason that I was attracted to McMaster, wanted to come here, is I think they've got a great defensive tradition as well. And a lot of that goes back to the work that Coach Knox put in here. And the opportunity to work with him was really appealing. In terms of our priorities on defense, we want to dictate how the game's going to be played. And I think that's really, really important. And so at every single game, somebody's going to be reacting to their opponent. We want to be the ones dictating how the game's going to be played and forcing the offense to do things that they don't want to do. I think when you look at it from a game planning perspective, kind of the starting point is who are their 2 or 3 best players, their 3 to 4 best run plays, kind of their 8 best pass plays. And then how are we going to take those things away and force them to beat us with their 4th or 5th best player, their 10th best pass play. The other big one for us is the 2 kind of deciding factors in winning football are takeaways and explosive plays, right? So attacking, sending a lot of pressure, that's going to force the offense's hand and give you a better chance to create takeaways over the course of the game, whether they're sack fumbles, interceptions, whatever the case is. But then explosive plays, like even though you're bringing a lot of pressure, you still want to be sound. And, one of the great things that I got from Greg in terms of defensive priorities, kind of his 3 big things that he would always talk about is who's deep, who's in contain, and who's got the back. And so any pressure that you put in, any scheme that you're going to run on defense, you have to take care of those 3 things. Those are always the big priority. And if you do those things, the little mistakes that you're going to make aren't necessarily going to kill you as long as you've got your 3 or 2 or 4 guys deep, depending on what type of pressure you got, as long as you've got contain on the quarterback, especially with some of the athletes that we have to defend. And as long as you can take care of backs getting out of the backfield, I think those are huge for what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think everyone talks about creating turnovers, and there's a ton of resources you can find. People talk about, okay, you gotta create pressure this way, create pressure that way. I think one of the cool things I've seen you guys do is consistently, like you said, you guys dictate, the to the offense that they're gonna have to pick up multiple types of pressure consistently. I think a lot of people, it's kind of like 4 verts for the offensive guys. It's great to have it, but if you're not comfortable using it, your guys aren't going to, believe in it. And I think your guys, pressure package in general, is something that each week you guys are getting a huge benefit out of because teams have to be ready to defend, on our end, so much of that. So in terms of maybe looking at, you talked about wanting to create that sense of, whether it's confusion in the offense or make them do things that they don't want to do. What are kind of the main ways that you go about trying to create that pressure? And how do you establish, like you said, those three key things that contain who's on top and who's on the back and those different ones?
Yeah, so I think in terms of teaching and all, we try to group our pressures into concepts as much as we can, which everybody always talks about, but it does make it easier from a teaching standpoint. So, we'll have our fire zones, which are overload blitzes. So you're either overloading a side of the protection or overloading the interior part of the protection. You'll have like replacement zone pressures where you're really just sending four guys and playing a base coverage, but you may be dropping a defensive lineman or something into an underneath pass zone, exchanging responsibilities with the second level guy. Man pressures, and there are trap pressures where you're trying to show one thing and then play something else. So I think when you teach it as a concept and say, okay, here's what we're trying to get done with these type of pressures, then when you go to a game plan for an opponent, if you're going to put in something different, you can always relate back to that, and guys kind of have an understanding of where they can and can't get beat right from the beginning. I think in terms of looking at, specific opponents, kind of the big starting points in terms of coming up with a pressure plan, you got to look at what are their protections, who are their worst protectors, and then how does the quarterback respond to pressure, right? And so if you're looking at the protection standpoint, how you attack a team that is primarily like a six-man half slide protection is going to be completely different than a team that's going to base out a big on big protection, or a team, like Western that's going to keep seven guys in, run heavy play action protections a lot of time. When you're looking at worst protectors, oftentimes it's the back. And so, a starting point is kind of, can we figure out where the running back's going to be in protection and how can we get him matched up on one of our best pass rushers, oftentimes a second level player. And then in terms of the quarterback, it's different things like how does he respond to pressure. So one of the cut-ups that we're going to look at every single week is we'll just go through and we'll have a cut-up for every 5-man, 6-man, 7-man pressure that they've seen. And you try to get a feel for how he's going to handle it. Is he a guy that's able to find his hots? What's their responses in offense? Are they going to try to bomber in more guys and protect and throw downfield? Are they going to try to replace the blitzer? Are they going to try to check out of the play entirely? What's the quarterback's escapability like, and what's his ability to create plays out of the pocket? And can you even tackle the guy in some instances? So when you factor all of those things in, then you start to come up with a plan for how you're going to attack, their protections, their worst guys, and how you're ultimately going to get after the quarterback.
I think that's one thing that's, maybe not changed so much, but it's becoming so much more prevalent. And I remember as a high school player, you had your saw blitz, you had your double dog or whatever, you had two backers down the pipe. And when you needed pressure, that's what you went to, right? And I think now, like you said, there's so many different ways to create pressure or create the illusion of pressure, or to try and get your best guy and their worst guy, or try and get, four guys to the side of the back, whatever it is. It's become so much more open, and especially in the Canadian game, it's tough because the five, if you're in a typical one back set, you already got five receivers out there, and like you said, you got to account for the back as well. So there's a lot of variables that people have to consider, and I think some of the new kind of things that people have been doing in terms of trying to create more creative pressures has been a huge piece of development, in our game, and something from an offensive standpoint as a running backs coach, and like we're always trying to figure out what's going on. And so many times, our traditional protections, now that people are attacking them, it makes you kind of reconsider, we're just going to slide, half slide, whatever it is. Like you said, it really is dictated to us that we've got to up our game on in terms of what our protections are capable of doing. If you were going to kind of pick, 3 or 4 pressures that are your kind of go-tos, I know you said you had some cut-ups, that you could show us a couple from. What's kind of you talked a little bit about families already, but what's kind of your go-to, base set of pressures that you think, coaches might benefit from getting a look at?
Yeah, so I think kind of the top ones that are going to be there week to week, I think any kind of overload pressure where you're sending 5 or 4 off the side is kind of a staple for us. And most of the time behind that, you're just playing some kind of 3 deep zone where you're avoiding an underneath zone. But especially if you can get a good feel for which way the slide's going or where the back's going to be in protection, and overload the side that the back's going to be in. I think those are something that we're kind of in week to week. If you're playing kind of an immobile quarterback, or even just a quarterback who's kind of spooked by immediate pressure in his face. Overload pressures in the middle of the offensive line, I think, are really, really good. You maybe don't like them as much against a good scrambling quarterback because it's going to influence them out of the pocket anyway. But if you know that somebody, freaks out a little bit when they've got direct pressure in their face, or you just know that the back's not going to do a good job stepping up to meet that pressure at the line of scrimmage, those are all things that kind of dictate inside pressure. I think the +1 pressures are something that you have to have in your back pocket. I think it's something that Greg taught really, really well. And I think just having the ability to do that, but more so the opposing quarterback, the opposing play caller, knowing on each second and long that you could bring everybody and bring one more than they can actually protect is really important. Even if you're not doing it all the time, you have to keep that thought there just so that they're always worried about it, and they're always worried about what are we going to do if this happens, because at the end of the day, you can't pick them all up. And then something we've gotten into more recently that I really like is our trap pressures, where you're either rolling one or a couple corners, or one or both corners down and behind the pressure and bringing overload off the side. And I think it's difficult for the quarterback, especially if they like kind of replacing to the side of the pressure, because you're putting somebody kind of into the area where they're going to throw hot that they're not really expecting to be there.
Yeah, and I think the biggest challenge that we see is teams that, when they can run that +1 pressure, like you said, they don't have to run it a lot for it to affect a lot of plays. Because in the back of your mind, you're going, okay, I really like this downfield pass concept. But, 2-3 plays ago, or even 2-3 series ago, we went to it and they were +1, our quarterback wore it on the chest, or, we ultimately didn't get the first down that we needed, or the big play that we needed. And I think that's something so many guys carry the pressures, like we kind of said at the start. And if you're not, like I heard Don Brown talk, in a clinic about as soon as you stop calling the pressures, the guys stop believing them. And it doesn't mean, that you got to call them every down, but, you've got to be willing as a defensive coordinator to, hey, this is a down we'd normally be in quarters, but we're going +1, and it might, maybe on this down it helps us. Maybe, it's kind of a neutral play, but that's going to affect everyone's process, from the quarterback to the offensive line, and even ultimately the play caller on the other side of the ball.
For sure. And I think even by doing that, now you've made some of your 4-man rushes, or like replacement pressures where you're just bringing one second level guy and dropping somebody out. Now you've made them a lot better, especially if you can show pressure, or show an alignment before the snap that's going to dictate a certain protection, and then drop most of them out. If you're able to bring +1, a couple times a game, that thought's always kind of back in there, and it's going to make those things a lot better because they are worried about it. So now you've got them throwing quicks or screens into, max coverage where you've got a lot of people out on the perimeter to deal with it.
For sure. So do you want to pull up some of those cut-ups, and we'll take a look at, some of the stuff you guys have been using in 2019, and coaches can kind of get a good look at, exactly what we're talking about here with some of these different kinds of pressures.
Sure. All right, you got that up there?
Yep, perfect.
All right, so the first cut up here is our fire zone. So these are mostly overload pressure. So either overloading a side mostly to the back, or overloading the interior part of the protection. All right, so this first one here is going to be a double A gap blitz. All right, so we're bringing the Mike and Will inside. And the thing I like about this pressure, one, you've got direct pressure right in the quarterback's face, which is really difficult for a lot of guys to deal with, and especially if you're getting a big-on-big or half-slide team, you're going to get at least one of these backers one-on-one with the back in his face right now, right? And so the big thing when you're scouting an opponent and thinking about running these is, how does the back do in protection, right? And does he do a good job stepping up and meeting the blitzer at the line of scrimmage? Is he really deep in the quarterback's lap? Like even on this pressure here, although we don't get the immediate sack, we've got a one-on-one with the running back right in the quarterback's lap here. It's really, really difficult as a QB unless you're extremely poised to hang in there and trust your protection, especially when that running back's getting benched back into you. And So now when you look at the coverage portion of it, really all you need to do is take away the immediate hot throws. And after that, that quarterback's likely going to pull the ball down and look to escape. And the other nice thing with this is you've essentially created 5 one-on-ones up front, right? So not just the running back on the backer, but every defensive lineman now is going to have a one-on-one with whoever is responsible for protecting them, and that gives them a good chance to win.
I think it's so tough, especially on the inside. As a running back coach, that's the last skill that guys really, tend to develop. And being able to hang in pass protection. So many of your one-on-ones as a back, you get practice on the edge. But when you've got to insert into an A gap and pick up a blitzer, that's advantage defense in almost every situation.
For sure. And so this would be the next example here. This is a weak side overload. So this is our weak half and our will backer off the weak side edge here. And then this is one of our trap pressures actually behind it. If you look at this weak corner, right? So he's able to hold off or jump down on any immediate flat here if the quarterback goes to it. Otherwise, he's playing his normal flat responsibility. But for the pressure here, they actually slide into this, so it shouldn't be as good. But this would be a long stick technique for our defensive end. So he's got to go over 2 gaps, and then we're bringing the half and the will in behind it. And so even to the slide side, like this is a difficult one for the offensive line to sort out. And the other one with this is we hadn't put it on film a ton heading into this game. So if you haven't worked it a lot throughout the week, even if you do happen to call it to the slide side and you don't get necessarily what you want out of it, it's still a pretty difficult pickup, I think, for the offensive line the first time they see it.
And I think that ability to, and obviously we didn't get a chance to play you guys this year, but we did scrimmage with you and we've played, whether it was Coach Knox defense, in the last couple of years, and that threat of pressure, like you said, you're always having that 7-man pressure in the back of your mind. This kind of stuff looks similar to a quarterback, but the coverage behind it is totally different. And that creates, a lot of challenges, certainly even at our level, but if you look at the high school game or summer football or whatever it is, that's a huge challenge for a quarterback at that age group to, even recognize the differences in where the ball's got to go.
For sure. And even if you look at it from a coverage standpoint, the other nice thing I like about these type of pressures is you're really just teaching guys who they're replacing in coverage, right? So for this pressure, because we're bringing the weak half and the will, our free safety is really just replacing our weak half in a cut concept. Our Sam's really just replacing the free safety in a cut concept. And then our rush is really just replacing our Sam. So even from a teaching standpoint, and it makes it easy because they're really just replacing one other guy's job and you can explain it to them that way. But also there's certain patterns to it, right? So if you're running a weak side pressure, you're going to have certain guys doing certain jobs in coverage responsibility, and they start to learn those things. And I think it makes it a lot easier to teach that stuff, but also carry more in your package as well.
So you're ultimately 3 on top and 4 underneath there with the rush dropping out late.
Most of these fire zone pressures would be 3 deep and 4 underneath. There's a couple that we would do where we're kind of 4 deep and 3 under against either run heavy or play action type of teams, but for the most part, it's going to be 3 deep and 4 under in those category covers.
And it still pushes the ball. Like, you see a lot of teams, here you're getting that advantage of, 4 to a side pressure. Like you said, typically you got to be in cover 0 to get that overload aspect. But with dropping out the defensive end, or if you're a team that's in a 3-4, type system, you're able to still play a pretty secure zone coverage that your guys probably play a lot on base downs anyway, but now you're getting that advantage of the pressure.
For sure. And the trade-off you're making essentially is you're voiding one underneath zone to get an extra rusher at the quarterback, but you're bringing that rusher from that advantageous position where he's going to have a one-on-one against their back, or you're overloading his side. And so, all right, they're beatable, yes, but you're not getting beat downfield for an explosive play. If you get beat, okay, it's a 10-yard gain and you line up to play the next play, right? And then even in like the next one here would be more of a run pressure, but not just against the pass, but even on run heavy or mixed down situations. If you have a good idea where the point of attack's going to be, well, bringing 1 or 2 guys from outside of the offensive lines count and putting them at the point of attack, I think makes it really difficult on the offensive line in the run game as well.
For sure.
Okay, so I mean, this will probably be the last one we look at for this set, I guess, but this would be our weak half and our weak corner here. So we're playing a 21 double tight set here. And so especially against Ottawa early here, 3-back personnel, you're thinking run heavy on early down. So pressures like this, just trying to bring, like I said, 1 or 2 guys from outside of the offensive line's count and put them in the run fit immediately makes it pretty difficult for them to sort it out. And so we get a tackle for loss here with our corner clean off the edge. So not necessarily just against the pass, but even in terms of attacking the opponent's run game, I think bring those guys from outside the box. And now, the offensive line not just having to worry about who's got the mic or the will, but what if the half comes? What if the corner comes? What if the safety comes down? I think that makes it pretty difficult on them to get their count correct play after play.
And especially, like you said, you have the advantage of being in zone, right? And that's one of the challenges. If you're blitzing the run and you're playing cover 1 or cover 0 behind it, you lose those second-level players. Here you still have those second-level players that are, not in the actual pressure and can fit off of that, which I think is huge.
For sure. Okay, and then like I said, this is one more example, overloading a side against Western now. So this time we're bringing the Sam and the Mike backer off the edge here, and then we're just rolling to a 3 deep behind it. So the free safety is rolling down to replace the Sam. Weak half is rolling to the post to replace the free safety, even though the quarterback gets the ball out here. So I'll go back. So even though the quarterback gets the ball out here, we put ourselves in a pretty favorable position here. So we get 2 one-on-ones against their 2 worst protectors on the field here. And so we're able to get, because we bring 2 behind the slide here, we're able to get a one-on-one for our Mike. We're able to get a one-on-one for our Sam. We're able to keep both of those backs in protection. And really, because we're dropping one of our defensive linemen out, we've kind of wasted 5 of their offensive linemen against 3 guys. And we've got 2 one-on-ones, and the one-on-ones are against their guys who are likely their worst protectors. They do a good job with their pickup here. I like that it's kind of in the quarterback's lap. So even though we don't get home with it, I think he still feels the pressure here and potentially affects the throw, makes it difficult for him to step into it. But even in that situation when you're not getting home, you've got pretty favorable matchups. And even if they do catch you in something, you're pretty safe on the back end in terms of your coverage.
For sure. I think it's so valuable. And a lot of high schools are playing with kind of hybrid defensive ends anyway, right? You got guys that are, good football players, and maybe they're more built like a linebacker. I know, for my dad, who's a longtime high school DC, we had a hard time finding 4 true defensive linemen anyway. So, we would always try and have that one defensive end that we felt, comfortable dropping into coverage, and you don't got to make his job complicated. And if he's responsible for an underneath zone, like you said, even if he makes a mistake, you're giving up, 8-10 yard play and you play again, but the offense is never comfortable.
For sure. And like you said, you're giving that guy a very straightforward drop-in coverage. You're not giving him a ton of responsibility, but he's maybe dropping to a middle hook or, into the weak flat to a 1 line where there's not a lot of immediate threats there. And so their drop is pretty straightforward, and you've got some pretty good matchups away from the pressure as well. All right, so this would be kind of our next set of pressures that we talked about here. So these are our +1 pressures. All right, so the general theory here is we're going to bring 1 more than the offense has in protection. So if they're in a 1-back set, they've got 6 eligible protectors, we're going to bring 7 guys. The pattern that we do that with will change up a little bit week to week or even a couple times within the game. I think the big thing that changes now is the secondary understanding what we've got going on up front. So we know we're going to get home here. It's different than, a zone pressure where you're bringing maybe 4 or 5 guys and the offense can pick it up and all you're really doing is creating a one-on-one. Here, you're going to win because you've got 1 more than they can block. So in coverage, the big thing we talk to our guys about is really all you're responsible for defending is quick game to fake, right? The only routes that they're going to have time to throw is either a 3-step game where the ball's got to come out right now, or it's going to be that one-on-one deep ball downfield, but they're not going to have time to run, the whole array of intermediate routes that you would typically have to worry about in a man coverage situation. So I think we try to shrink the number of things the defensive backs need to worry about. And, even though the secondary is sometimes detached from the front a little bit, I think it's important for them to understand what you have going on up front, because it does change their response in coverage. So this one here, 12's in a 3x2 set. So we're bringing the 7 box defenders and playing man coverage behind it. Who the free rusher is going to kind of be dictated by their protection here. So the back's going to pick up 1. They actually do a good job here, and they leave the widest guy. So this is the guy they would want to come free here. And typically offenses are going to try to leave the widest rusher for the quarterback. And now the quarterback's got to identify it and get the ball out quickly. And even if you go back to the route concept here, they're running a divide concept. So really the only hot throw that they're going to have here is this under from the number 1 week, which we don't do a great job of covering. But you can see the quarterback kind of feels the pressure here. And, as soon as he hits the top of his drop, he kind of starts already trying to escape the pocket, and we've got a free rusher. The other big one here, especially going back to, kind of our 3 priorities, is who's got the back. And so any +1 pressure, you're kind of exchanging one guy playing man coverage on the back. And now whoever that running back blocks in protection, he's got to hug him up and make sure he doesn't get out for the rest of the play. So I like our Sam here, right? This would be a hug technique here. So he's got to grab this back and make sure that he doesn't get out. So if he tries to slip out for any kind of screen, any kind of late check down, he's got to make sure that he stays with them for the duration of the play. And especially that technique, it could be anybody in the front, because you don't necessarily know who the back's going to take in protection. But it's really important that the guys understand that whoever he steps to or near has to take him, and they've got to be really unselfish to make sure he doesn't get out. And then this is actually the exact same pressure a couple plays later. And so like this game's a perfect example. We went +1 the first, second, and long of the game, the first, second, and long in the second half. And then the only 2 other times we called it the rest of that game were 2 of the last 3 plays. And so having it in your back pocket for critical situations, I think, is really important. This is the exact same play actually against the same pressure look here. Again, you can see the quarterback's got to get the ball out right now. Our free safety does a good job staying on top of 3 here. And because the technique's a little bit different in our +1 pressures, you can actually see the throw and does a great job breaking on the ball here. And you can see that our will comes clean again. And so the quarterback doesn't have a lot of time to go through his options here. He's got to get the ball out as soon as his foot's hitting the last step of his drop here. And it was a great play by our free safety. And again, a good job by our Sam grabbing that back and making sure he doesn't get out.
And that's, I think, a huge one, especially, you can have a lot of fun, drawing these pressures up, but it's all about how your guys understand their role in the pressure. And that's Sam's job to make sure, hey, this back's not getting out on screen or out for a check down, that, we can have that quarterback dead to rights, and then, he's able to find the back at the last second. That guy's job's just as important as the free rusher.
For sure. And I think especially with that package, it's something that you got to be conscious of. We made mistakes on it a couple of times last year for sure, but that's one of the big ones that guys have to have a good understand, because there's nobody covering that back. So everybody in the front's got to take him. If he even looks like he's trying to slip out, there's a huge priority on that, and you've got to grab him and make sure he doesn't get out. And, one of the biggest plays that you can see is if that running back gets out, in any kind of peel pressure where nobody's really accounting for him, it's a pretty dangerous situation for the defense.
For sure.
Okay. This will be probably the last +1 here. So this would be an 8-man +1 here against Calgary. And so, the first 2 were 7-man +1s. Since they're 1-back protection, Calgary's got another fullback on the field here. So they've got the threat of 7 protectors here. So now we're going to bring 8 to make sure that we still keep our +1. And the 8th rusher here is going to be our weak half. You can actually see here, this is a good example of kind of our technique in our +1 covers, is we're really just defending quicks and fade. And so our free safety does a good job sitting on this hitch here, driving it, he eventually gets beat on the double move here, but that's not really something that he's got to concern himself with. He could still play it better and keep his eyes down on the hip of the receiver to see the double move, but he's protected by the pressure here. So the guys can be a lot more aggressive driving, quick game, because they know the quarterback's not going to have time to reset and find something downfield. 8-man pressure here. So again, they do a good job. They leave the widest guy, which is the weak half. Fullback doesn't do a great job taking the Sam here, so we actually get 2 free rushers to the QB. And then this is another good job by our will backer here, hugging up that running back to make sure he doesn't get out on screen in case they try to slip him out late.
Those little coaching points are so important in terms of, your DBs understanding that they don't need to be as conscious of that second move, because if the defense is operating the way it should, that second move should be something that the front's taking care of in terms of their pressure already getting home. So I think that's one of those, like, the devil's in the details, like with anything. And, you see the level of detail there. Like, sure, you're like, a lot of people might say, oh, they just blitzed everybody. Like, it's kind of a 50-50 chance. Well, there's a lot of, little things that go into the success of that play. You got to hug up the back. Your guys got to all hit the right gap. Your guys who are unblocked have to be coming off the edge. And obviously, one of your one-on-ones there, you get a nice win from the blitzing backer. So I think those are the key things that, for coaches that are looking at this going, well, how's this different from what we're normally doing? I think that level of detail in terms of those 7, 8, whatever it is, the +1 stuff, that's something I think a lot of people can benefit from.
For sure. And even the nuance of how you're going to shorten the corner for those +1 guys, right? And so, from an offensive standpoint, like I was saying in the first couple clips there, every offensive coach, they're going to try to leave the widest rusher for the quarterback. So, as a defense, you got to find ways to shorten the corner for that guy as much as you can, so they've got the quickest path to the quarterback. And then, sometimes schematically, you're going to try to change the pattern so that maybe you can slip a guy inside free. But if the offense does a good job, you still have to have a way to beat it. And the technique of how you try to shorten the corner for those edge rushers, I think, is really important. This next category, these would be our trap pressures here. So these pressures, we're kind of trying to show one thing, and then, like I said, either roll one or both corners down into an underneath pass zone and take away any hot throws. So the first one here, this is out of our sub package. And so this would be like our dime personnel, and we've got a 3-man front on the field. But even in terms of trying to dictate or confuse the protection, this is a look that we'll often get into where we've got everybody in the front kind of lined up 5 yards off the ball. And either coming from depth or sometimes showing pressure and then getting out early, but trying to make it really difficult for the offensive line to sort out who's who in protection and where the extra guys are going to be coming from. And especially the 3-man front personnel on second and long, I think, can make it really difficult on offensive line and backs to sort out as well. So this pressure, this would be our Sam and our strong half off the strong edge here out of the 3-man front. This end would be working 2 gaps over. Our nose is kind of weak A, and then we've got an end and contain off the weak side, trying to show our corner high, and then he's going to spin down into the strong flat with our free replacing over the top strong and our weak half replacing in the post. And then really our 2 backers have to drop out of here as hook defenders. He's got 3-2, and then he'd be dropping off the 4. And so the part I like about this, especially if you're playing a team that's going to try to throw hot and replace the pressure or bring a strong side pressure, and the corner's in a position where he can jump down on any immediate hot throw to the flats, and he's got vision inside, so he's got a good chance to see the QB and jump anything that comes out quick. And then this is a good example of getting 2 guys on the back here. And so because Waterloo slides the protection to the boundary here, now kind of create a situation where you've got the Sam and the strong half 2 for 1 on the back. So he should attack the inside half, and that leaves him clean to the QB off the outside edge. And so just trying to put the running back in a really difficult situation. He does what he needs to. He's got to take the inside rusher, and now they got nobody to account for the outside rusher. And then this would be the exact same pressure here later in the game. This time it's going to be our Sam that comes clean. Right, so you'd like to see him cross-phase the tackle if he gets out here early, and that would leave our half off the edge clean for the QB, but now we kind of put their tackle in a difficult spot where he's got two guys and he can only take one of them, and our Sam does a good job winning on his pass rush here. This one's out of a different look, so this one's a true 30 front here. I said you'd like to see the Sam cross-face there, but he does a good job with this chop rip to win on the rush. And then this is a good example of what I was talking about earlier in terms of protection. So Ottawa, you get a lot more big on pig protection as opposed to the half slide you see from most other teams. They're an empty set here, so it's a little bit different, but this would be a trap pressure to both sides where we're spinning the corners down. We're going to try to mug both of the guards before the snap and then pop those inside guys out as hook defenders here, and then we're bringing a defensive back off either edge here. And so this backer doesn't do a good job with his look. He's getting out of there too early. This backer is doing a much better job covering the guard. And so you can see both corners here kind of sliding down in position to jump anything that immediately goes to the flat hot. And then we've got two backers popping out to take any inside throws quickly here. And most teams, when they get into this big on big five-man protection here, you know, this guard's got to worry about the guy right over him, but then he's also got to worry about the guy off the edge here. And so even though we're only going to bring one of them and he could in theory get here, you know, putting this guy in his face, mugging him up and having him waste half a step before he gets out there is going to make it tougher, and they do get confused to the strong side here.
It's so tough for teams to be, when you're considering, you know, obviously there's a lot of looks here and you're able to do a lot at the university level with the time we get with the guys, but you know, as you look at those plays conceptually, like everyone's running cover 3 or cover 4 in some sense, everyone's running man in some sense. It's just getting the most out of your pressures while still being able to play those coverages that your guys are comfortable in. And, you know, those are 3 great examples of ways really with running coverages that most high schools coaches are running as it is. You know, it's one of those things where you're getting the most out of your install. It's not necessarily you need, you know, 25 different pressures every week, but when you have a couple options and there's some symmetry your players can find between what we did last week and this week and, you know, what we kind of build our defense on, I think that's huge. So really appreciate, you know, you putting the time in and having those cut-ups ready for us. And I think it's something that, you know, as the passing game continues to be, you know, a huge part of the Canadian game, getting pressure on the quarterback is so important. And you guys have certainly had a ton of success with that at Mac.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
This episode is brought to you by the Ontario Football Alliance. Make sure you check us out on all our social media platforms and subscribe to us at our YouTube channel /3down development for our daily content.